At exactly 2:17 p.m., a police officer stood inside a quiet suburban home in Frederick, Colorado. The air felt wrong. A pregnant woman was missing, two little girls gone without a trace. And right there, standing just a few feet away, was their husband, their father, Chris Watts. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't asking questions. He was watching, calm, still, almost detached, like a man observing a situation, not living inside it. To anyone looking from the outside, the Watts family looked like something out of a dream. Shanann Watts was vibrant, expressive, full of life. She documented everything: her home, her children, her marriage, and especially her love for her husband. Chris Watts was quieter, reserved, the kind of man people described as easygoing, harmless, even boring. Together, they had built a life. Two daughters, Bella and Celeste, and another baby on the way. A new house, a growing family, a future that looked stable. But sometimes, the most dangerous stories are the ones that look the safest. Because behind the smiles, behind the carefully curated videos, there was another story unfolding. One that no one was paying attention to. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything broke. Instead, it built slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. Financial pressure started creeping in. Debt, bills, expectations. The kind of stress that doesn't explode, but lingers. And inside the marriage, things were shifting. Arguments, control, emotional distance. Shanann was strong, outspoken. Chris avoided conflict. He didn't fight back. He didn't push. He absorbed. And over time, that silence turned into something else. Resentment. But resentment doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes, it looks like nothing at all. Then, everything changed. Her name was Nicole Kessinger, a co-worker. At first, it was just conversation, work talk, casual. But it didn't stay that way. It became frequent, then personal, then secret. Chris Watts, the quiet, passive husband, started becoming someone else. More confident, more alive, more free. With Nicole, he wasn't a husband. He wasn't a father. He was unburdened. And that feeling became addictive. August 12th, 2018. Late that night, Shanann walked through her front door. Security footage captured it. She had just returned from a trip. She was tired, pregnant, unaware that this would be the last night of her life. Inside that house, something happened. Chris would later give different versions. But one thing remained constant. There was a confrontation, an argument, and then violence. Not sudden, not chaotic, but controlled, deliberate. He strangled her, slowly, while she fought, while she realized what was happening. And then it was over. After Shanann was gone, the house didn't fall silent. It didn't end there, because upstairs, two small children were still alive. Bella, Celeste, too young to understand what had just happened, too young to imagine what was about to happen next. Chris would later describe those moments in fragments, pieces that investigators had to put together slowly. What they discovered was almost impossible to process. He didn't act in panic. He didn't call for help. Instead, He began preparing. He wrapped Shanann's body, carried her, not in fear, but with purpose. And then he loaded his truck. And somehow, in a moment that still confuses investigators to this day, his daughters were still alive. Inside that same truck, sitting just feet away from their mother's body. The drive lasted nearly an hour of silence, an hour of thought, an hour where he could have turned back, but he didn't. As the sun began to rise, Chris drove toward a remote oil site, a place he knew well, isolated, quiet, hidden. This wasn't random. This was planned. What happened next is something investigators would later describe as one of the most disturbing sequences in modern criminal history. But even now, some details remain hard to fully understand because they don't follow logic. They don't follow emotion. They follow something else entirely: detachment. And then he drove back home as if nothing had happened. No panic, no urgency, no visible emotion, just routine. But reality doesn't stay hidden forever, because while Chris was trying to maintain control, someone else had already noticed something was wrong. Shanann's friend knew her patterns, knew her habits, and knew this silence wasn't normal. Calls went unanswered, messages unread, appointments missed, and within hours, she made a decisive decision by calling the police. When officers arrived, Chris Watts let them in, and from the very beginning, something felt off. Not what he said, but how he said it. His tone, his body language, his stillness. At one point, he stood with his hands on his head, watching officers search his home, like a man waiting, not hoping. Then came the moment that brought a bit of tension to Chris. A neighbor had security footage, and when Chris watched it, something happened. The once composed Chris began to tighten. His words stumbled. For the first time, he looked nervous, because in that moment, he realized he wasn't in control anymore. From that point on, everything began to unravel. The calmness, the composure, the illusion, it all started to crack. And soon, the truth would begin to surface. Not all at once, not clearly, but in pieces, fragments, contradictions. At this point, investigators knew one thing for certain. Chris Watts was hiding something, but what they didn't know yet was just how far he had already gone. At first, he stayed consistent, calm, controlled, repeating the same version of events. His wife was missing. He didn't know where she was. He just wanted her back. But the more he spoke, the more something felt rehearsed. Then came the moment that would break the illusion. The polygraph test. A simple premise: answer truthfully or be exposed. He agreed to it, confident, or at least pretending to be. Did you harm your wife? No. Do you know where she is? No. But the machine told a different story. He failed. And that's when Chris Watts began to change his story. At first, he didn't tell the truth. Not fully. Instead, he created a version of events where he wasn't the only one responsible. He claimed that Shanann had harmed the children, that in a moment of rage, he reacted. It was a story that tried to shift blame, to soften reality, but it didn't hold because the evidence told a different story. Eventually, piece by piece, the truth came out, not all at once, but enough. Enough to understand what really happened. This wasn't sudden. It wasn't an accident. And it wasn't a moment of uncontrollable rage. It was a decision. So how does something like this happen? How does a man described as quiet, polite, harmless become capable of something like this? Chris Watts didn't fit the typical profile. He wasn't aggressive. He didn't have a violent history. But what he did have was something far more dangerous. Suppressed emotion. This was the testimony he gave. I knew, before that morning, something wasn't right in my head. It's like I had already decided, and I didn't stop myself. When she came home, we talked for a little bit. It didn't feel normal. There was tension, like we both knew something was wrong. We went upstairs, and we started arguing. She asked me what was going on, and I told her how I felt, that I wasn't happy anymore, that things had changed. She got upset, and it just kept building. And then, it just happened. I got on top of her, and I didn't stop. Even when she was struggling, I didn't stop. I don't know why. It's like something took over, and I couldn't pull myself out of it. After that, everything felt quiet. Too quiet. Like it wasn't real. I remember just sitting there, trying to understand what I had done. But at the same time, I was already thinking about what to do next. Not how to fix it. Just what to do. I didn't call anyone. I didn't ask for help. I just kept going. Like I was on some kind of path that I couldn't turn away from anymore. And I knew, once I started, there was no going back. In November 2018, Chris Watts stood in court. No trial. No long defense. Just a plea. Guilty. He was sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. No possibility of parole. But sentences don't bring closure. They don't answer every question. And they don't undo what's been done. A family was gone. A future erased. And a story that would stay with people long after the headlines faded. Some stories end in courtrooms. Others stay with you. This is one of them. If you want more stories like this, the kind that hide in plain sight, subscribe to Crime in the Shadows. Because sometimes the darkest truths aren't the ones we see.